Well, Taylor Parker has been sentenced to death for capital murder. She was found guilty of murdering 21-year-old Reagan Hancock as well as Hancock's unborn baby girl. The Bowie County jury deliberated for an hour and a half before returning the guilty verdict. Now, back in October of 2020, Parker killed the pregnant mother and cut her unborn baby from her womb. Hancock died at the scene. Her baby was pronounced dead at an Oklahoma hospital.
In 2020, a quiet town in Texas was shattered by a crime so shocking it would make national headlines. A young mother, 7 months pregnant, was violently taken from her family, her unborn child stolen from her body in an unimaginable act of deception. Reagan Simmons Hancock had no idea that the woman she had once crossed paths with would soon bring terror into her life. 4 months, Taylor Rene Parker had been living a lie, pretending to be pregnant, all in an effort to hold on to a relationship she feared would slip away. Taylor Parker, a 29-year-old woman from rural Texas, had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier, making it impossible for her to conceive. Yet, when she began a relationship with Wade Griffin, a man desperate to have a family, Taylor couldn't admit the truth. Instead, she began faking a pregnancy, creating fake ultrasounds, and even hosting a gender reveal party. For nearly 10 months, she walked through her community, showing off a false pregnancy belly, telling everyone she was expecting a child. Her deception went unnoticed until it met Reagan Simmons Hancock. Reagan, at just 21 years old, was also expecting a child. She was a young mother, hopeful for the future, and weeks away from welcoming her second baby into the world. Little did she know that Taylor, who had reconnected with her online, had begun to eye her unborn child. But what could drive a person to such extreme lengths? What made Taylor go from telling lies to committing a crime so brutal? The truth was a tangled web of fear, desperation, and a need to control the future. Wade Griffin, Taylor's boyfriend, had made it clear he wanted children. Taylor knew the only way to keep him was by fulfilling that promise, no matter the cost. Welcome to The Last Sentence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. At just 21 years old, Reagan Simmons Hancock had her whole life ahead of her. A mother to a 3-year-old daughter, Kinley, she was a young woman who had a love for her family, her community, and the new life she was preparing to welcome. Reagan was pregnant with her second child, a daughter she had already named Braxlyn Sage Hancock. With only a few weeks left until her due date, she was eager to bring her child into the world and start this new chapter of her life. But for Reagan, this would be a chapter she would never get to experience. Reagan's life seemed like that of any other young woman in her small Texas town, filled with family, joy, and anticipation for the future. She had a close-knit family who supported her and were by her side during her pregnancy. Her mother, Jessica Brooks, was a constant presence in her life, helping care for her daughter, Kinley, and preparing for the arrival of Braxlyn. Reagan was excited to become a mother again, and the days leading up to the birth were filled with hope and anticipation. But unbeknownst to her, Taylor Rene Parker had already crossed paths with Reagan, and her life was about to take a drastic and horrifying turn. Taylor, at 29 years old, had a past filled with lies. She had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier, a surgery that made it impossible for her to conceive a child. Yet Taylor desperately wanted to keep her boyfriend, Wade Griffin, who dreamed of starting a family. Taylor knew that the only way to keep him was to give him the one thing he wanted most: a child. Taylor fabricated an entire pregnancy. She posted fake ultrasound photos online, staged social media announcements, and even threw a gender reveal party to make her deception seem real. She convinced Wade Griffin that she was carrying his child, all while knowing the truth: there was no baby. She created a false reality in a desperate attempt to hold on to a relationship and to maintain the image of a perfect life. As Reagan's pregnancy neared its end, Taylor saw an opportunity to get what she had longed for: a baby of her own, no matter the cost. With Reagan getting closer to her due date, Taylor reached out to her, and soon the course of their lives would be forever altered. It was not just the baby that Taylor wanted, it was the lie she had been living that needed to be maintained at all costs. Reagan, unaware of the depth of Taylor's deception, would become a tragic victim of a crime that was calculated and cold, planned with meticulous detail. As Taylor's lies began to unravel, the fate of Reagan and her unborn child was sealed in a way that no one could have predicted. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Taylor Rene Parker drove to Reagan Simmons Hancock's home in New Boston, Texas, her mind set on executing a plan that had been months in the making. Reagan, 21 and 7 months pregnant, had no idea that the woman who had been pretending to be pregnant with her own false story was about to take everything from her. Taylor Parker arrived at Reagan's house in the early hours, claiming to be in labor. She was careful, deliberate, knowing exactly what she intended to do. Carrying a bag that contained tools for the job, Taylor seemed calm, perhaps too calm. She pretended to go into labor as Reagan welcomed her into the home. Taylor, for months, had been living a life of deception, pretending to be pregnant to keep the affection of her boyfriend, Wade Griffin. But now, the time had come for Taylor to steal the one thing she had convinced herself she wanted: a child. Once inside, Taylor Parker initiated her brutal attack on Reagan. What followed was a premeditated crime of violence that shocked even seasoned investigators. Taylor used a hammer and a knife, striking Reagan with such force and precision that it left investigators stunned. The severity of the attack indicated not just a crime of passion, but something much more chilling: a carefully orchestrated act of violence designed to end a life and claim what was not hers. Reagan's injuries were extensive: multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma, leaving little chance for survival. But the violence did not stop there. After Reagan was incapacitated, Taylor took the next horrifying step. With surgical precision, Taylor Parker used a scalpel to remove Reagan's unborn child, a child who was mere weeks away from being born. While the attack unfolded, Kinley, Reagan's 3-year-old daughter, was in the house. Unaware of the horrors taking place just rooms away, Kinley would later be traumatized by the scene she would find upon waking. Taylor, with the child now taken from Reagan's womb, swiftly fled the scene, leaving behind the lifeless body of Reagan. Braxlyn Sage Hancock, still alive at the time, was taken by Taylor, a baby who would soon face an uncertain future in the hands of a woman who was willing to do anything to claim her own child. As Taylor Parker drove away from the house, covered in blood and still holding the stolen child, the scale of the crime was only beginning to surface. Kinley remained in the house, unaware of what had just transpired, and it would not be until Jessica Brooks, Reagan's mother, arrived to check on her daughter that the full extent of the violence would be uncovered. When Taylor Parker was stopped by law enforcement, it was the first step in unraveling the horrifying truth. Despite her claims of having just given birth, there were glaring contradictions. She was not in the state one would expect after childbirth. There was no afterbirth, no evidence of labor. This raised immediate suspicion. Taylor was covered in blood, but the police quickly realized there was no way she could have given birth in the way she claimed. Reagan's baby, Braxlyn, had been taken, and her story began to fall apart. In a matter of hours, a well-planned crime by Taylor Parker had begun to unravel. The brutality of the act was clear, but as the investigation continued, the motive would soon come into focus. Taylor was not just a murderer. She was a woman so deeply entangled in her own web of lies that she resorted to something far darker than anyone could have imagined. In the immediate aftermath of the crime, authorities worked quickly to piece together the shocking reality of what had happened. Taylor Parker's story began to unravel almost as soon as she was stopped by law enforcement. The morning after the brutal attack, Trooper Chad Wynn of the Texas State Police had his first encounter with Taylor. As he pulled her over on a rural highway, he immediately noticed her frantic demeanor. She claimed to have just given birth to a child, but the inconsistencies in her story raised immediate suspicion. Trooper Chadwin's instincts were right. There were no signs of childbirth, no afterbirth, no umbilical cord. Her clothing, while bloodied, showed no physical signs that would be consistent with someone who had recently delivered a baby. Her calm, almost collected behavior seemed out of place for someone who had supposedly just given birth. As the officer continued his questioning, Taylor's story became more contradictory, with no physical evidence to back up her claims. It was clear that something wasn't right. As the investigation deepened, EMS professionals quickly confirmed that Taylor's account of having just given birth was false. No medical personnel had witnessed any signs of labor, and Taylor had no apparent injuries or signs of delivery. Forensic teams began combing through evidence, hoping to uncover the truth behind what had happened at Reagan Simmons Hancock's home. The critical breakthrough came when forensic testing on Braxlyn Sage Hancock revealed something chilling: oxygen deprivation. The baby, though alive when taken, was struggling and had only been able to survive for a short time outside of Reagan's womb. Forensic analysis confirmed that Braxlyn Sage's cause of death was a result of lack of oxygen, which occurred during the removal from the womb and subsequent lack of medical care. The baby had barely been alive when Taylor abducted her, but her actions had ultimately led to the child's tragic end. The forensic evidence was undeniable, and Taylor Parker's elaborate lies began to fall apart. The physical evidence gathered from the crime scene, the lack of childbirth signs, and the findings from the autopsy painted a stark picture of just how carefully Taylor had planned and executed her crime. As investigators began to understand the full extent of her deception, they closed in on Taylor, piecing together the disturbing details of her actions. With each new discovery, the case grew clearer. Taylor Parker was no longer just a woman with a fabricated story. She was a cold, calculating individual who had taken extreme measures to get what she wanted: a child she didn't deserve. The authorities now had the evidence they needed to bring her to justice. In September 2022, the trial of Taylor Rene Parker began, and the courtroom was filled with tension. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the details of Taylor's calculated deception. They detailed the months of lies, from the fake ultrasounds to the fabricated pregnancy announcements. Taylor's web of manipulation, designed to create a false reality and hold onto her boyfriend, Wade Griffin, was now fully exposed. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a woman who had planned her actions with cold precision, a woman willing to go to any length to maintain a life built on lies. But the defense did not sit silently. They argued that Taylor suffered from borderline personality disorder, hoping to sway the jury toward a lesser sentence. Their claim was that her actions stemmed from a deep mental instability. However, this argument would not be enough to change the course of the trial. The prosecution's case was too strong, and the facts were undeniable. Taylor's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder, her meticulous planning, and the sheer brutality of her actions left no room for doubt. In the midst of the trial, Jessica Brooks, Reagan's mother, took the stand. The room fell silent as Jessica spoke of the unbearable pain of losing her daughter. She described the heartbreaking moment when she arrived at Reagan's home and discovered her daughter's body. The grief in Jessica's voice was palpable, as she spoke about the emotional toll the crime had taken on her family. She described the endless pain of knowing that her daughter, who was so full of life and hope, had been stolen from her in such a violent and senseless way. After just an hour of deliberation, the jury reached its decision. Taylor Parker was found guilty of capital murder, a verdict that brought some sense of justice, though it could never undo the damage done to Reagan's family. The courtroom, still heavy with emotion, awaited the next phase, the sentencing. The case had been tragic, but the wheels of justice had finally begun to turn. On November 9, 2022, after a lengthy trial, the courtroom was filled with tension as Judge John Tidwell delivered the final verdict. Taylor Rene Parker was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The gravity of the moment weighed heavily on everyone present. Judge Tidwell's words were clear, marking the end of a case that had left a community reeling. He called Taylor Parker's actions pure evil, acknowledging the cold, calculated nature of the crime. The sentencing brought some sense of justice, but the emotional toll of the case would linger long after the verdict was read. Jessica Brooks, Reagan's mother, stood in the courtroom, her grief still fresh. As she spoke, her voice cracked under the weight of a loss that could never be undone. She described the pain of losing her daughter, a young mother full of hope, and the further devastation of knowing her granddaughter, Braxlyn Sage, had been taken so violently. Jessica's words echoed through the room, as she explained that no punishment could ever fill the void left by the loss of her loved ones. The trial, the verdict, and the sentencing were all milestones in the pursuit of justice, but they did little to heal the deep emotional wounds. As of now, Taylor Parker resides on Texas death row at the Mountain View Unit, Her fate is sealed, but the appeals process has dragged on. Despite the appeals filed on her behalf, the conviction remains intact, and Parker's sentence stands. The case that shocked the nation has reached its final chapter, though the echoes of the tragedy will never truly fade. For Jessica Brooks and the family of Reagan Simmons Hancock, the closure provided by the death sentence offers a small measure of justice. However, the emotional scars from this brutal crime will endure. As the legal system moves forward, the tragic story of Taylor Parker and the lives she shattered remains one of Texas' most chilling cases. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more true crime stories, and let us know where you're watching from. Join us as we continue to uncover the darkest corners of human nature, one story at a time.